Hello friends, welcome to Data Pandit. Today we are going to talk about uh, second session as in a micrograph. So we are going to understand the internal functioning of the micrograph, okay, and component involved in the micrograph, okay. So there are three major components with respect to micrograph actually. Run micrograph component that we talked about earlier, and then there will be a two more component which is micrograph input and micrograph output. Okay, so let's talk about the complete end-to-end picture of the micrograph, uh, structure basically. So let's hook up to the this design. So this is a mm, uh, actual micrograph, actually account balance micrograph, let's say. So, for example, we have a underneath actual micrograph file which is used to obtain the account balance for a particular account ID. Okay. So if that is the case, then let's say this is our micrograph. This is a continuous graph basically is going to run, right? So if you might have worked in web services graph and those request response graphs, you might have seen these RPC subscribe and RPC publish components, right? So similarly, we will accept the request using the RPC subscribe, and then based on the control input record, right? So the run micrograph will call the actual MZ file, okay, micrograph object file, which is this one basically, and then the response is received and the status checks will happen, okay. That is also done by run micrograph component, okay, and the response is obtained and collected, and then final response in the request response model, RPC publish would publish that response finally. So I am not talking about each and every component within a complete micrograph, but all the component associated with the run micrograph processing basically. Okay. So you know that RPC subscribe will subscribe to the request which is coming in from the client, like SOAP request, like there will be a RPC header, and then there will be a SOAP header which will be attached, and then the body will be received, right? So that will be processed, and then you know there will be a, this is the run micrograph component. So the run micrograph component will have a you know uh, multiple parameters. Let's check how many parameters would be there for run micrograph component. So there will be input in count parameter, out count. So these are the optional number of ports. How many optional input port you want to assign, how many output port optional, not mandatory output port you are going to assign. And so optional and mandatory, so control port and the status port are going to be mandatory port for this run micrograph component, and the other port like response, error, I labeled it as a request, response and error. You we can label it as a different way, okay. So for this processing, right, this combination I'm labeling it as a request, response, error, okay. So there will be these are the optional parameter, number of parameter we can configure as part of parameter configuration of run micrograph component, and there will be a processing timeout, okay. So normally there is an we don't have to assign basically. So if you want to do, but you can assign memory limit and processing time, okay. There will be a package parameter which will have a like package in another components, right? So other different components we will have a package, right? So we can define our functions and we can declare types, we can include other transform function, DMLs, etc., etc. So the everything which happens in other packages will happen over here as well, okay. We will talk about what are the different functions, mandatory functions we have to define as part of this processing, okay. And reject, threshold, logging and log transform, these are the different parameters we like happens in any other transform component. So I talked about mandatory ports, like control port, status port is going to be mandatory, optional port is input and output port, and then there will be a micrograph input and micrograph output components. So these are basically the adapter in the production environment basically. So when we, so I talked about, right, so run micrograph component actually calls this mg file. This is the, so now right now we have account balance.mp. We will create as an mp file, but when we deploy it, okay, so we will have to call the command actually m underscore deploy micrograph, name of the mp file or pset file, if okay, and then name of the file and .mg. So if you actual command, if you want to see like this, m underscore deploy micrograph project directory, name of the actual file, and then corresponding in the run directory I'm creating the account balance.mg. Okay, so I'm taking the same name. Okay, you can have a different name also. So this becomes your mg file finally, and that is going to be loaded by run micrograph component in the continuous graph and executed. Okay, so that is going to be done by run micrograph component. So let's talk about the what is the structure of the actual mg file, micrograph object file. So we will have a input, micrograph input, and micrograph output, micrograph output. So when you develop the graph, so what are the different parameters of run micrograph input and output is like we will have only one parameter basically, test underscore file. Okay, path of test data. So this will be in development environment, you can uh, you can use the as a like test data. Okay, it's like a .dat file or any other text file. You can have a path of that test data file, and you can pass that value into that, and you while testing purpose only. Okay, but you need to use the micrograph input. You cannot use an input file or output file like that. You have to use the micrograph input, because this file when we'll deploy, so in production environment this is going to be helpful. So these are the component which are going to be used as an adapter to the actual micrograph file. So for run program, run micrograph component, these components are going to be used as an adapter. So how it will identify the adapter is the label of the these ports. So request, you need to give the this port as a label as requests, because and also this micrograph input should have request as a label, otherwise it won't recognize. Okay, and also while this response and error, right? So the corresponding micrograph output component will be correspond to the other output optional port, right? This response labeled as response of this one, and this error is labeled as a error port. So these ports, optional ports, are corresponding to the micrograph input and output respectively in the production environment, so that it will have a work as an adapter. So this is very important concept basically. Okay, now let's look at the what is the package, right? So what is the functioning of this run micrograph component does in production in real in reality, right? So whenever the request is coming, so that is going to the control into the control port, right? So from the control port, the run micrograph will look at the control port, and it will have a defined mandatory functions within the package. Okay, so what are those functions are execution specs, prepare execution, and the create status. So prepare execution, so what the first work of the run micrograph component is, you know it will prepare the prepare execution function. It will accept the control port, what is coming in the control port, and it will check the particular SOAP action actually, which is coming into the control data, right? So depending upon that SOAP action, it will call the particular web service, right? So for example, here we have account balance, so we will check the control data SOAP headers. Within SOAP header, what is the SOAP action? If it is a balance, then I will call the this. Okay, this is my this file. Okay, micrograph object file. Okay, so this is defined in over here. Okay, this function in the package transformation, right? We can have a multiple more or depending upon the condition. Okay, here I am taking one. If you have multiple different web services, depending upon the SOAP action, you can call different web services. Okay, now, but make sure that your web services are serviced by properly by the uh, defined micrograph. Okay, now, so first part is prepare execution function operates on the control input record, and it will determine which micrograph needs to be executed, right? Which web service needs to be called. And then second thing is run micrograph loads that execution object file, and which is the deployed micrograph. Okay, it will loads that into here and try to execute that, and pass the control to that, and then it will execute. And you know so this request um, is corresponding to this request port. So all the things which is there in this port will be read by this micrograph input request, and then the request is passed into the actual account balance. So here, like maybe it is a subgraph, right? So all the things might happen over here, and then finally the response is delivered via the micrograph output. And if it is an error, then micrograph output and the error this via this one. Okay, and corresponding here it will be there. So what about status? So status, there is a create status function which is mandatory, which is defined in the package. So execution result and control. So based on the control and execution result which is received from the micrograph object execution, we will have a status as a one, and status dot star is equal to control dot star. So this is how we define the package in that. Okay, so now, so this is how it happens basically. So micrograph run micrograph components runs, receive the control data, and control data is need to there are functions which are use read the control data and calls the loads and executes the actual MP file, and then the response is received back here, and then the collected over here, and then the publishing. So I did not talk about how the the request is modified, create translated translated into the actual XML, and then from within that XML body we will get the actual account number and account balance happen. So these are the normal web service graph basically, in the sense of there are now, so you might be using a lookup or maybe some other database components over here within that account balance graph, right? So this you can understand it as a subgraph. Okay, so there are other components. Okay, so at high level I have kind of explained you how it happens basically. So more important concept is like these adapters. Okay, number of output port and input port which are optional, they are corresponding to, so you need to take care of the label of these. So okay, and then the functioning of this. So basically it is, I talk about, this is a continuous graph, and this is a serial sorry batch graph basically. Okay, and I think we have talked about these two, right, chapter 2 and 3 altogether. So how we create the micrograph and what are the components associated with micrograph execution, right? Three components, and how it calls and request response happens. So with that, I think thank you so much. We are going to take one more kind of follow on this one. Uh, let's say session on miscellaneous concepts, right, with respect to micrograph in another session, maybe the video number 3. Okay, thank you so much.